All right, if you would open up to Psalm 19. Psalm 19. First of all, I want to start with a quick review. Do you remember why David sings? Why does he write these psalms? Praise to God. For what in particular? Forgiveness, salvation, that the grace of God, the compassion of God, that His loving kindness has been poured out. And David said, since I'm forgiven, I'll sing of your righteousness. I'm going to tell of who you are. Now, I shared with you at the end of the class last week to go ahead and be reading on Psalm 19. And as you did that, I want to start off with a question. In reading through all of Psalm 19, I know it's only 14 verses, were there any themes that you saw in Psalm 19 as you read through the last week? Anything stick out to you? God's creation speaks of God's glory. What else? What else stuck out to you as you read? God's perfection. Perfection of God. Anything else stick out to you? Let me ask you a second question. We don't have a lot of detail behind Psalm 19 to kind of give you a setting in terms of what David's age was whenever he wrote this. Whenever you were reading through it every day through this past week, what would you assume, and it is an assumption, what would you assume his age to be? Did you imagine him being a young shepherd boy? Did you imagine him being someone who's a little bit younger, 20s, 30s, someone middle-aged, someone a little bit older, someone mature, someone nearing the end of their life? In reading through the Psalm, what would you assume, age-wise? Older? 50-ish? Does that count as older? I don't know. But you notice in going through it, we don't really know, but there's something I want you to kind of grasp as we go through it and see it. Notice Psalm 19, look at the very first verse. It says, the heavens are telling of the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of His hand. What is David taking in? What is he looking at? The awesome things in creation. Now, you see how easily he could be of any age and catch this. Time as a young shepherd boy, spent a lot of time outside. Time during the day, time even at night. And you look at these things and go, have you ever been awestruck by God's creation? If you think about the different scenes that you've seen with your eyes, what sticks out in your mind? What kind of scenes really made an impact on you to go, this is just truly glorious, what God has made? Rocky Mountain. Always there, no matter what time. Did you ever think that, oh, Chuck, yeah, you think, can't comprehend that God was stopping. Chuck talks about standing on, I assume, a levee and looking out and seeing the roaring Missouri River come close to his farmland. And to think all that power surging and realize that God stopped rivers so that his people could pass by on dry ground. And to think of the awesomeness of his power. Here's David taking these things in so many different scenes. And I want you to kind of go on to look at verse 2. He says, day to day pours forth speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. Notice what's being poured out. Speech, days, nights, knowledge, all these things are just kind of being poured out. And yet, if you notice it here, back in verse 1, it says, the heavens and their expanse. So we're dealing with heavens in terms of the skies above of what you see, the expanse in terms of looking at where the planets are seated. I mean, looking out at all these things, and then seeing the statement, day to day pours forth speech. It says, night to night reveals knowledge. I can remember a time specifically traveling to get out to Colorado, and we got there, we arrived about 1 o'clock in the morning. The camp was about 10,000 feet in elevation. And we hadn't really come out of the vehicle very, very long, very much for the whole trip, and stepped outside and looked like all the stars were just right on top of you. And it's a night that I'll never forget as long as I have a memory. Because it just seemed like no matter, you couldn't look far enough to where you didn't see stars anymore. It was just all around you. And to just think in terms of, I wonder what the starry night that Abraham saw looked like whenever he's promised descendants. And so as we see these things, so often we think, well, they're just really, really cool to look at and really marvelous to see and majestic. But to realize they're speaking. They're talking. Now, he says it here, day to day pours forth speech, night to night reveals knowledge. Verse 3, there is no speech nor their words, their voice is not heard. I think they're talking, but is it an audible language? No. It's not something that if you put your ear down to the rock, it's going to tell you something. Or if you look up to the sky, there's going to be something that comes thundering down. But he says, it's there. David's saying, I see it. I hear it, even though it's not heard. I'm taking it all in. Then, verse 4. It says, their line has gone out through all the earth, and their utterances to the end of the world. In them he has placed a tent for the sun. He says, their line has gone out through all the earth. If you notice, and I don't know if you remember this from going through Romans class, but actually this verse, Psalm 19:4, is quoted in Romans chapter 10, verse 18. And in the quotation there, it says, it's asking about Israel. Has Israel not heard? And this is what gets quoted. Does Israel have any excuse not to know the Creator? Does Israel have any excuse to say, we don't know? I mean, remember, the Sabbath was all about, for Israel, to remember your Creator. Remember that He made the world in 6 days, and on the seventh day He rested. It was ingrained within the Jewish people, the Israelite people. And to go, there was no excuse. And you come here and go, their voice has gone out through all the earth. Creation is saying something. It's saying something marvelous. The next time you see a landscape or mountains or a valley or a river, something that really catches your eye, and you just sit back and marvel at the glory of God. Here it is. It's speaking. It's talking. But it's not an audible thing that's heard. And realize this too. Here's God that's created this whole universe. And it's so majestic and marvelous. Yet what do you know about its endurance? Same one. You see part of creation in a pure form, looking at the moon. Right. And as you think through, this creation is only temporary, right? If God would take so much to make this temporary place so majestic, what does it make you think of next? How about the eternal? Chuck, still continues. Still continues. Right. No help from us. If you notice the tail end of verse 4, it says, in them he placed a tent for the sun. And you start looking at this and go, have you ever seen a sunrise or a sunset that really got your attention? That you really just kind of marveled at? Every one of them. You think in those terms of, if you've ever seen a sunsets just have the vibrant, vivid colors to go with them. Maybe before, maybe after a storm has already gone through and the sun is setting, and you get all these yellows and oranges and reds, and to look at it and to see the sun starting to go over the horizon and the angles at which the light spectrum comes through, just to sit and marvel at it. Yet at the same time, you look at sunrises and sunsets. How many of them are exactly the same? Yet how many of them so vastly different? Now, he says here, in them he has placed a tent for the sun. He's going to make a comparison here. Look at the next verse, verse 5. Which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber. Now, weddings have changed quite a bit over time. It used to be in these times that the groom was the one that the wedding was all about. How many of you think that's the way it is now? It's all about who? It's all about the bride. Now, here you go back and realize the groom was supposed to provide for family completely. It all came through in terms of inheritance, all these other things. So the groom was really the one who was kind of the forward step. I want you to think in these terms. Even in the first century, Jesus tells a parable about 10 virgins. Remember who they're waiting for? The bridegroom. How long do they wait? However long it takes. And of course, the comparison is 5 wise and 5 foolish, who were prepared, who weren't prepared. And to realize they had to be prepared because once the bridegroom came, you weren't there. What happened? You're shut out. You don't get to go in. They realize there's a little difference. I know that's about 1,000 years between here, but to look at it and see, he says, which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, everybody pays attention. I mean, when's the last time you walked outside and you didn't notice that the sun had come up? I mean, it comes to your attention pretty quick, right? Don't even, it's kind of secondary. Then he says, the sun, he says, it comes out of its tent like a bridegroom's tent. As he comes out and everybody takes notice. You want probably a modern day parallel. Whenever the bride steps out, what does the crowd usually do? They usually stand. Do they notice? Yeah. But what do people normally do then? Usually there's a pivot. Turn and to see this bride coming in. Well, here's the sun. He grabs your attention. Then, at the end of verse 5, I want you to pay attention to this. It says, it rejoices as a strong man to run his course or to run his race. I don't know if you care to watch athletics. I don't know if you care to watch track and field events. But there was a time, I'll tell you a few details here. Back in 1981, there was a running back for Georgia, and he was outstanding. He was about 6'1", weighed 225 pounds. He was known to be great on the football field. And yet in the off season, he ran track. At a track meet, he's there, standing next to Carl Lewis, who's going to go on to win several medals in the Olympics. Also, another person who is there was a man by the last name of Floyd, who is the world record holder for this 60-yard dash. Now, these other two men weighed 50 pounds less than this football player. So you just imagine if you're going to run a race to go, you know what, I'll just carry an extra 50-pound bag with me. This was him. I mean, strong man. And you can watch the video if you want to on YouTube. They started the race. He beat both of them, and he won the race. And to watch a strong man run his race, it's just fun to watch. You go, he's carrying 50 pounds more. He's about an inch taller or two than these other two guys. They look kind of small compared to him, and yet he outruns them all the way to the end and wins the race. He says, does that grab your attention? To see somebody who's too big and too tall to win a fast race, and then he wins it anyway? He says, it rejoices as a strong man to run his course. How do you think the crowd responded? Oh, yeah. I can't wait to see that again. Here they were. Realize, what are we talking about here? I'm about the sun. Then, verse 6. He says, its rising is from one end of the heavens and its circuit to the other end of them. There is nothing hidden from its heat. He says, it rises on one horizon and it sets on the other horizon. He says, it goes in its circuit. Now think about this. We know the earth rotates. There's a circuit. You realize you're seeing the sun. He says, here's the rising of it. It grabs your attention. What's it telling you about God? Didn't this happen the day before? And the day before? The day before? Don't worry, we're not going to keep going. But what do you understand? God faithful? Make his sun rise and set every day of your life. I mean, you start to think in those terms, going, if you live to be 100 years old, see 36,000 of those. And every day. What does that tell you about the faithfulness of God? He promised that it would happen. How's he doing on his promises? What do you know about when he makes a promise? He'll keep it. Do we hear that? Do we hear the sounds of that when we see a gorgeous sunrise or a gorgeous sunset? Or we see a landscape that's just marvelous and majestic to our eyes? Now, he even goes on to say, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. How much of the earth is heated by the sun? All of it. It makes colder places warmer and it makes hot places hotter. right? It says it affects everything. What about God? What does he affect more than the sun? Now, verses 7, 8, and 9, there's a little three-word phrase I want you to pay attention to. Look in verses 7, 8, and 9. Tell me what three-word phrase shows up 6 times. Of the Lord. So who is this really about? The Lord. Now, a lot of times people come to these verses and say, okay, well, let's talk about the law, let's talk about testimony, let's talk about precepts and commands and judgments. Who's this really about? The Lord. Remember, here's all creation. He says, sending out a voice that is unheard and only appreciated by those of faith. And then to come to it, creation doesn't give any audible instruction, does it? You probably know even ungodly people who appreciate sunsets, sunrises, but who do they not appreciate? The Creator. Now, boy, right. Well, it says he was standing on a beach with a bunch of people there watching the sunset. When it finally got below the horizon in the water, it says all of a sudden they all started to applaud. They had an appreciation for it, but once again, not a submission to God. As you notice it here, look at verse 7. I want you to notice it's going to use different terms as it goes through these next 3 verses: law, testimony, precepts, commandment, fear of the Lord, and judgment of the Lord. See those, but see of the Lord. Pay close attention to that. And then notice what happens. There's a result of these things. Verse 7. The law of the Lord is perfect, restoring the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. What do you know about the law of the Lord? Perfect. Whenever the Lord gives a law, is it only going to be good for some occasions? He says it's perfect. Now, if you want to flash forward to the New Testament, whenever they start looking back on the Old Testament, the problem with the Old Covenant wasn't that it was wrong. It was holy, righteous, and good. Where was the problem? The people. So, yep. Even brings it in. And notice this part, though. Well, they don't obey it to this extent. He says, the law of the Lord is perfect. And what does it do for the soul? It restores the soul. So, like Chuck brings up, even the ungodly see it. And if they take faith in it, what happens? Life gets better, even down to what part of you? The soul. Now, he says, the testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. What is testimony? When do people offer testimony? Proof? Witness? Witness is the idea. If you're bearing testimony, you're bearing witness to something. Now, here's the thing. The precepts of it, he says, the testimony of the Lord is sure. Whenever the Lord tells you something, can you rely on it? Sure. You have to wonder, well, is that only good in certain situations? He says, it's sure. And notice, what effect does it have? To go from simple to being wise. Who are you going to have to have any wisdom? You're going to have to listen to the testimony of the Lord. Now, if you notice, it's using this term, of the Lord, 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 of the Lord. What is that telling us as readers? Have we submitted to the Lord? Have we submitted to the law that's perfect? Have we submitted to the Lord that has a testimony that's sure? It'll give us wisdom. It says it'll restore our soul. Verse 8. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. When you hear precepts, what do you think of? An idea? What was that? Principles? What if we use the longer word? What's your perception? What's your perception of things? You ever get to a situation and you have a perception of what's going on, and then you find out, I missed it. I didn't have the right perception. What do you know about the perceptions of the Lord? They're right. Because whenever He makes a perception, He says, look, this is the way I see it. It's not up for opinion. It's right. Now, then, of course, what happens whenever we submit to what He perceives? What does it do for us? It says, rejoicing the heart. Because now you don't have to figure it all out on your own anymore, do you? You like trial and error in your life? We do it all the time, but do we like it? No. What if you knew, what if you took faith to know, you know what, this is the way God perceives things to be, and I'm going to rely on Him? What does it do to your heart? Oh, it's just rejoicing. Like, I know it would be wrong. Can you imagine walking into a time they're giving a test, and you get to walk in with all the answer sheet in your hand? You go, I know these are all the right answers. I'm just going to write them down. And they go, okay. Okay. This is going to be great. Wouldn't it rejoice your heart if you knew that was okay? Don't cheat. Just think about the idea. Chuck. Right. We'll get to that in a moment. Now, he comes to it, and you go, the precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart, and to go, here we are, we get this opportunity. Then he continues. He says, the commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. He says, what about when the Lord gives you a commandment? Is it made to be a burden? Think about it in terms of purity. Because when I give you a command, have you ever sat down to read through Scripture and you go, I wish these commands were more specific? You know that God put them in a place where they'll always be pure? And you go, will you apply the principles? Will you submit to the Lord? Do you find rejoicing in submission? Because then you're really going to enjoy life in the Lord. Because here's what He offers. You submit to Him. He's the one who made all this creation. And He made it all function just fine without any help from man. You notice on day 6 of creation, man and woman are the last two made. It didn't need man to make it go. Now, he says, the command of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. He says, oh, I see it now. You start to look at the commandments of God and see them in action, you go, well, that makes perfect sense. That just makes perfect sense. Verse 9, he says, the fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true. They are righteous altogether. The fear of the Lord is clean. I want you to think about that for a moment. You're probably already thinking in your minds about Proverbs. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. So look at it. The fear of the Lord is clean. Because whenever you fear the Lord, you're going to be walking by wisdom. You'll be walking by the knowledge of the Lord. And what does it do with your life? Takes away a lot of uncertainty, cleans up a lot of things. You start to take these things together and go, wow, here He is. Because the fear of the Lord is clean, and notice, what happens when you respond out of the fear of the Lord and you're clean? How long is that going to last? Enduring forever. It's almost like you could hear the echoes of eternal life. Right? He continues in verse 9. The judgments of the Lord are true. They are righteous altogether. You ever watch the judgments of God? I mean, you start thinking back through, maybe you've read some history of Jerusalem in AD 70, and you see the whole city destroyed, where there's not even one stone sitting upon another. You sit back and you go, that was right. I told them because of their wickedness, he would destroy them. And they didn't change, they didn't turn their heart, and they met up with judgment because they didn't surrender to the Lord. You ever look at his judgments and go, right? Even whenever it happens in our own lives, we make proud statements and we have proud actions, and then we get torn down for them. Sit back and finally humbly say, you know what, that judgment was right. That was right. Sometimes those things are hard to take in. But at the same time, whenever you're going to humble yourself before the Lord, if you just notice the tail ends of all these, you almost feel like you're reading the Beatitudes in a way, don't you? Because you have this attitude, look at the outcome. Restoring the soul, making wise the simple, rejoicing the heart, enlightening the eyes, enduring forever, righteous altogether. Verse 10, he says, they are more desirable than gold, yes, than much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey and the drippings of the honeycomb. On the open market today, gold sold for $1,854 per ounce. Would you take these commands, precepts, law of the Lord over $10,000? Sure won't. It won't get us anywhere close to eternity in life. What about $1 million? I could stand here and offer you $1 million for you to make a move to walk away from the Lord. Would anybody be foolish enough to take it? Judas did it for 30 pieces of silver. John. Somebody mature. Definitely so. Ralph. That's right. But can't take it with us. Somebody stole it. Right. So you start to look through and to be able to see gold as being temporary. The things that the world says are precious, realize they don't have really a whole lot of value in the scheme of eternity. You stop and think in those terms. And then he continues, verse 10, sweeter also than honey and the drippings of the honeycomb. And notice the comparison, sweeter than. What have you ever eaten that you couldn't add honey to make it sweeter? Now, there may be some things you can think of, but not much. I don't know about you. Sweeter than honey, I go, where's the biscuits and the butter? But anyway. He says, drippings of the honeycomb, verse 11. He says, moreover, by them your servant is warned. Now, if you notice verse 10, they. What is the they? He goes all the way back to verse 7. They, the law of the Lord, the testimony of the Lord, the precepts of the Lord, the commandment of the Lord, the fear of the Lord, the judgments of the Lord, they are more desirable than gold. All of them. Verse 11. It says, moreover, by them, the law of the Lord, the testimony of the Lord, the precepts of the Lord, the commandment of the Lord, the fear of the Lord, the judgments of the Lord, moreover, by them your servant is warned. In keeping them there is great reward. Isn't there always a warning? Anytime you start to look at the commandments of God, don't you see warning? And they're there for a purpose. He says, what happens if you keep them? Look at the rewards. Restoring the soul, making wise the simple, rejoicing the heart, enlightening the eyes, enduring forever, and they are righteous altogether in His judgment. How's that for a reward? Now, verse 12. Who can discern his errors? Notice his is not capitalized. Because who can discern your errors? Things of the Lord. They can find them. He says, acquit me of hidden faults. What does it mean to be acquitted? Declared innocent by one who has authority. He says, acquit me of hidden faults, verse 13. Also keep back your servant from presumptuous sins. What is a presumptuous sin? Willful? Intentional? Have you ever presumed you're right? Anybody in here ever presumed they're right? Presume that they know the answer to the question, the right thing to do in life. They presume maybe that it's okay that I'm bitter in this situation. It's okay that I'm angry or upset about this. It's okay that I'm unforgiving. What would that be? Presumptuous sin. He says, also keep back your servant from presumptuous sin. Now notice what he calls himself. Servant. Who's he a servant of? Think about what we've just been through. Of the Lord. He says, I'm a servant. I'm here to listen to these things, to be warned by them, to have a great reward in keeping them, to find something that endures forever. He says, keep back your servant from presumptuous sins. Let them not rule over me. Ever got yourself in a real dilly? I mean, you made a presumption about what somebody did or what action you should take, and then it comes to your attention. There's a judgment of God that comes down. I'm not saying all of a sudden you're struck down dead, but just the idea of all of a sudden you realize things aren't going well because I didn't make the right decision. I didn't listen to the precepts of the Lord. I wasn't attentive to the commandment of the Lord. I wasn't attentive to the law of the Lord. And then the statement, he says, let them not rule over me, then I will be blameless. Now, real quickly, I'll just tell you something pretty quick here. In the Hebrew language, in verse 13, it says, then I will be blameless. The same word that's back in verse 7, where the law of the Lord is perfect. What can God do with us? Make us blameless and perfect. So in holding to these things of the Lord, what does it do for you? Will it mature you? That's really the word. Will you be blameless whenever things go wrong because you walked according to the commandments of God? Then, he says, and I shall be acquitted of great transgression. Now, great transgression. Did David have any of those in his life? But what does he know? God forgiven? Is he blameless? I would think that makes me tend toward the idea of he's an older man when he writes this. I can't prove that. He's looking back on his life and saying, you know what? Every time I got myself in trouble, I stepped away from the fear of the Lord, the precepts of the Lord, the law of the Lord, the testimony of the Lord. He says, that's where I got in trouble. I presumed I already knew what was right. Remember whenever he wanted to move the Ark of the Covenant, David's king, he's like, it'll be better if we just take it and put it in its rightful place. And then they go to move it on a cart, and Uzzah reaches out and touches the ark, and he dies. And it says that David was angry. Is that a right move? Think he presumed that he was okay to be angry? And then it reverts and he turns to, then he was afraid. And fear comes in. And then, wouldn't you know it, he goes to the commands of God. And what does he find out? It's only to be carried by priests on poles. And whenever he does that, whenever they come into the city with it, remember what David's doing? He's dancing and rejoicing. Because what did he find? I found the ways of the Lord. I don't have to fear that these priests are about to die because they're carrying it the way he desires. Realize all of a sudden, here's what we would call it, there's even a peace. Now, he continues here. He says, I shall be acquitted of great transgression. Things get a right movement, a right direction. Then, verse 14. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Now, where does David start to look now? In himself. If you kind of think of Psalm 19 as a whole, it starts off about the God of creation and its glory. Then it's about coming to the Lord. And then now we deal in terms of, and now what about me? He says, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight. Is God paying attention to what we think about? And you also realize, do I need to be careful about what I entertain in my mind? What I think about? What I dwell on? Meditate is about, it literally means to talk to yourself. It's that little voice that you hear inside whenever you don't say anything audibly, you're talking to yourself. Do you let Scripture affect the way you think? He says, and let the words of my mouth also be acceptable in your sight. The words matter. And where do words originate from? Is it not the heart? What do you meditate on? Have you meditated on whenever you've been wronged, how the best way to respond is? Whenever someone has wronged you, have you meditated on what would be the most Christ-like thing to do? Because whenever you meditate on those things, then when the situation comes, what words come out? Is it ones that honor the Lord? No, there can be mistakes. But you realize, he says, make sure that even my thinking is pleasing to you. Not just my words. The way I think about things. How I reason through them. Then, it says at the end, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Now, I want you to think through this for sure before we run out of time. He says rock. Now, I want you to think, in the Sermon on the Mount, the last few verses of the whole sermon, Jesus tells a story about a wise man. What does he build his house on? The rock. And if you remember, the comparison is, he who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise builder. I wonder where he's going to get wisdom from. Who's he going to be listening to? Jesus, the Lord. Now, I want you to think through in your head about Psalm 19. It starts off talking about creation. Whenever Jesus was born, did anything announce his birth? You remember the Magi? Remember Matthew chapter 2? I'll read it to you real quick here. There's verses 1 and 2. Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea. This happened while Herod was king over Judea after Jesus' birth. Wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. They asked, where is the child who has been born to be king of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose. Now we have come to worship. Creation announced the birth of Jesus? Was Jesus glorified in his death and burial and resurrection. Acts chapter 3, verses 13 through 15 talk about it. He has been glorified. Then you come, like what's here in Psalm 19, you come to the of the Lord section, verses 7, 8, and 9. See what you think about this. The law of Jesus is perfect, restoring the soul. The testimony of Jesus is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of Jesus are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of Jesus is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord, honoring Jesus, is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of Jesus are true. They are righteous altogether. Who do you see this psalm is really all about? It's all about Jesus. Because whenever you respond to Jesus, to honor Him and to anoint Him as Lord over our lives, what do you find? Soul that's restored, making wise the simple, rejoicing the heart, enlightening the eyes, and we'll be able to endure forever. And we even count as righteous the judgments of Jesus. Now, at the end of Psalm 19, verse 14, it says, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. The word redeemer only shows up 19 times in all of Scripture. Not one of them is in the New Testament. Maybe you would prefer a different word. Savior. God. When we choose Him, you see that. Even take it a step further. In Jesus' life, what did He show power over? Water turned to wine. Storms on the sea calm. Walk on water. Power over death. What do you see Him as having power over? All of creation. And who is it declaring the glory of? Him. Right? So you start to look through these things and put them together. All right, we'll try. Look at Hebrews chapter 12. Look at verse 2. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2. Here's the response. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before Him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Now, notice here he is. Did he run his race? Remember in Psalm 19? It says, like a strong man running his course, running his race. Did Jesus run his race? What did He show you? He show you strength, the ability to endure and overcome. You just see it again and again and again. So what's the response for us? Fix our eyes on Jesus. He's the author and perfecter of faith. If faith's going to be refined, you have to look at Jesus. And you notice there's great reward in it. Now, next week we'll come back and we'll look at Psalm 20. I want to encourage you. Psalm 20 is only 9 verses, so it won't take you but maybe 2 or 3 minutes to read it. But to study it takes a little while longer. I want to encourage you this week. Set time apart every day. Go through it at least once. It's so short, you could probably do it twice. Take it in. Look for themes. Look for what sends out for you. And then come back ready to share next week.